Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Transitioning to a Cage-Free Europe. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. I'd like to let you know that you have joined the presentation listening only using your computer speaker system by default. We hope to have a few minutes for questions following our speakers, and you can submit your questions through the questions box found at the right-hand side of your screen. It is now my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Olga Kiku, Head of the EU Office of Compassion in World Farming. Over to you, Olga.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This webinar is the first part of a series looking at the issue of better farming in Europe. Just a few days ago, the End the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative was officially presented to the European Commission, and we hope that we will start seeing the beginning of the end now. I would also like to wish everyone happy Cage-Free Day today. It's the 13th of October, and this day celebrates the progress being made to get rid of cages in Europe. I will now pass the floor to MEPs from the Cage-Free Working Group of the Animal Welfare Intergroup. And first, we start with MEP Eleonora Evi, who comes from Italy, and she's the co-chair of the Cage-Free Working Group.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, on behalf of the MEP Cage-Free Working Group, thank you very much to everyone for being here today. A big thank you to Compassion in World Farming for organizing this event and to everyone who is joining today's discussion. What a long way we have come. It feels it was only yesterday when we launched the European Citizen Initiative and the Cage Age at the European Parliament, uncertain whether we would be able to reach the threshold of the 1 million signatures necessary to make the EU institutions respond to our call for a cage-free Europe. And here we are now. Only a few days after the European Commission received the 1.4 million signatures of people from all over Europe calling for an end to the use of cages in the EU farming. An historic result. And the Cage Age is only the 6th European citizen initiative to reach the required threshold of 1 million signatures since the first initiative was launched over 8 years ago. And this is the very first successful initiative for farmed animals. It was an outstanding mobilization and expression of participation and civic engagement, which I am sure will inspire many more successful ECIs, one which EU institutions and decision makers cannot afford to ignore. And indeed, Brussels has not remained indifferent. Only last week, I have sent a letter to the European Commission co-signed by other 85 members of the European Parliament from different nationalities and from across the political spectrum, calling on the Commission to introduce ambitious legislation to end the cruel practice of caged farming in the EU. These show, if 1.4 million signatures were enough, that this is not a partisan issue, an issue that only animal rights activists care about. No, it is not at all like this. But this is a battle of civilization and humanity, which is already mainstream. Today, the transition towards cage-free farming should no longer be seen as a question of if, but a question of how and when. And today's event is the perfect platform to discuss this how and this when. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the link between industrial farming practices and the risk of emergence of new pandemics. Industrial farming practices, like caged farming, are seen by our citizens more and more as an aberration which must be stopped. It's time to transition away from a model based on the reckless exploitation of nature and millions of animals towards a more humane food system in line with nature, cruelty-free, and closer to the expectation of our citizens. Transitioning towards cage-free farming can indeed not only end the atrocious suffering of the over 300 million of animals that are every day forced to spend all or a significant part of their lives imprisoned in cages. This transition can also have positive benefits on our environment and our society, And I look forward to the presentation of the EIEP report, which further delve into the environmental and socio-economic benefits of this transition. I really believe that the EU has no excuses not to embrace this transition, and I hope this event will successfully convey this message and help kickstart the change that we all want to see. Let me stop here for now, and I give the floor to my dear colleague and co-chair of the Cage-Free Working Group, Anja Hazekamp, for some opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eleonora. Good morning and welcome, everyone. We are very happy that the European Citizens Initiative was such a big success. It's amazing to see how many citizens and NGOs worked the past year to make this happen. And many thanks to all of them. 1.4 million signatures. Wow, this shows how concerned people are and that they want things to change. And they want to change things now. And that's so urgent because more than 300 million animals are locked up in cages on a yearly basis in Europe alone. You can't see them, you can't hear them, but they are there. And they are locked up behind bars in confined cages, way, way too small. These caged animals, they have no way of normal development, let alone to exercise their natural behavior. These cruel caging practices are a symbol of everything that is wrong with our agricultural and farming system. It is a miserable business that sustains animal cruelty. It's time to stop behind the ifs, the whens, and the buts. It is time for a change. And the COVID-19 crisis has shown us, like no other, that we cannot go on with business as usual. We can't keep animals in such close proximity to each other. This is not only horrendous for the animals, but also a huge threat for the spreading of zoonotic diseases. We simply cannot continue with animals in cages. There will certainly be socio-economic consequences following banning of cages in the EU. But let's remind ourselves that there will be positive changes for our own health, and there will be huge effects and benefits for the animals when they are freed from their cages once and for all. So thank you, Compassion in World Farming, for keeping up the fight, for bringing us together, and for organizing this webinar. As we have a very busy and packed program today, I will round up, and I will look very much forward to all the presentations by our guests. And I would like to thank you all for your time and your involvement and by joining us this morning. Let's end the cage age. Let's make Europe cage-free and be an example for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anja and Eleonora, for the introduction. We will now continue with Catherine Jada, who is the research manager at Compassion World Farming, and she will talk us through the problems and alternatives to cages in animal farming. So Catherine, it's over to you.
Thank you, Olga. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Just bear with me. Okay, so yes, I'm going to talk about the common systems of cages that we have here in the EU, the issues with them, and what the alternatives are. And I'm going to focus, just because we don't have that much time, I'll focus on sows and on rabbits and on laying hens. So we know that animals are sentient, right? In other words, they can feel emotions. They can feel joy, they can feel pain, fear, and this is proven by science. And it's also recognized in EU law. And because they are sentient, the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU requires that member states, when formulating policy, pay full regard to their welfare requirements. And in addition to this, the directive for the protection of farmed animals stipulates that the freedom of movement of an animal must not be restricted to cause unnecessary suffering. Also, that where an animal is confined, it must be given the space that it needs according to its physiological and its behavioral needs, in accordance with what we know from our experience and from scientific knowledge. So, what do we know about the welfare requirements of these species from science? Well, if we look at laying hens, the breeds of hens that we farm for eggs have descended from the jungle fowl of the Indian subcontinent, and they retain most of their natural behavioral instincts. So in a natural environment, hens would spend a lot of their day foraging for food. They're highly motivated to scratch through the surface layers of the earth and look for insects and different plant species. And they also dust bathe regularly. This is a behavior that cleans their feathers. It removes stale fats from their feathers, and it keeps their feathers in a healthy condition. And to do this, they make a dip in the earth, as you can see here, and then they shower earth through the feathers to clean them. And so strong is their motivation to perform this that in cages where they don't have a proper opportunity for dust bathing, hens will still try and carry out this behavior, even though they don't have the right environment and the right materials for doing it. They also have a strong instinct to perch above the ground for protection from predators. And that's because they're prey animals. So they've evolved that when they want to rest, they want to get up off the ground to feel safe. And we know from science that these behaviors, they're not just nice to haves, they are important, essential behaviors for basic welfare. In essence, they're a fundamental part of being a hen. And we also know that when hens can't perform these behaviors, they experience stress and they can develop abnormal behaviors such as pecking each other's feathers out. And of course, they experience poor health and welfare. And here we have a video showing the enriched cage, which just under half of the EU's hens are housed in today. So it's clear that in enriched cages, hens are deprived of their most basic needs, even of their freedom of movement, let alone their strong instincts to forage, to dust bathe, and to perch up high. And we know from science that these cage systems cause hens a great deal of stress. And then if we look at rabbits, rabbits are very athletic animals. They've evolved these powerful back legs for running and jumping, and also for digging complex networks of burrows. And they would spend a lot of their day foraging widely for food and live in stable groups that share a territory together. And here we have some footage taken in 5 EU member states of standard cage rabbit farms. This was taken in Italy, France, Greece, Czechia, and Spain. And rabbits are kept in these cages for their whole lives. So this is their entire life. And we can see that this is no life for any animal. It prevents almost all of their natural behaviors. So you can see why back in 2017, the European Parliament voted to adopt a report which highlighted grave concerns regarding the poor welfare and the high stress and mortality levels in farmed rabbits in Europe, which had already been concluded back in 2005 by EFSA. And the report also recognised that those barren battery cages that we saw are an inappropriate housing system for rabbits. and it called upon the Commission to draw up legislation to protect farmed rabbits. And then earlier this year, EFSA released another scientific opinion on rabbits and the production systems, and it found that conventional cages, like we saw, caused the worst welfare of any housing system for breeding females and for growing rabbits. And it also stated, quite logically really, that the restriction of movement of cages cannot be solved without significantly changing the system. The report found that welfare in organic systems is generally good. So I'll just move finally to sows and the cage systems that we use for sows before we look at some of those alternative systems. So today's pigs that we farm, they've descended from wild boar and they retain most of their natural instincts. They are highly intelligent social animals, and they live in small family groups and range a long way in search of food. They have these incredible sensitive snouts that can root through the earth and find food for them to eat. And with regards to sows specifically, when a pregnant sow is due to give birth, she will walk many kilometers looking for a suitable nest site that's isolated, and she'll spend several hours finding branches and twigs and leaves and constructing quite an elaborate nest that she will disappear into in order to give birth to her piglets. But in modern intensive farming systems, sows are all but immobilized in farrowing crates for weeks on end around each pregnancy. These are farrowing crates. This is another view of a standard farrowing crate. And the sow is shut in here around a week before she's due to give birth. And she's confined like this in this one position where she cannot even turn around. She's on a hard metal floor. And she's confined like this for 5 weeks solidly. And in these systems, it's even difficult for her to stand up. If you could just play the video, Alex, thank you. So you can see that life for a sow in a farrowing crate is full of frustration. It deprives her of everything that she is internally motivated to do. She can't build a nest to give birth in. She can't move around to try and get comfortable when she's heavily pregnant, when she's going through labour and for 4 solid weeks afterwards. And she can't even move to protect her piglets, which she has such a strong drive to do. She's entirely helpless. As we can see, it's even difficult for her to stand up. And when the sow has been in the farrowing crate for about 5 weeks, her piglets are then removed and she comes out of the crate and she gets re-inseminated within a couple of days. And then she gets put into one of these, which is a sow stall or an insemination stall or gestation crate. They have different names. And by EU legislation, she's allowed to be kept in here for a further 4 solid weeks. So we're talking about almost 9 weeks of almost continuous confinement, bar those couple of days in the middle, in a cage with a hard, solid floor, no bedding. All she can do is stand up and lie down, and even that is difficult for her. And this happens every single pregnancy, which is 2 to 3 times a year. So it's not surprising that scientific studies show that the sows are extremely stressed in these systems, and they often develop abnormal behavior. At the beginning of this clip, we see the sows biting the bars repetitively, which is one of those abnormal behaviors that they develop as a result of the stress. So clearly for sows too, in these systems, they are subjected to extreme confinement, and we're not meeting the requirement of legislation to provide for their welfare needs. So when did these systems come into being? When did we switch from, the type of farming that had gone on for centuries to these systems? It was actually a fairly recent phenomenon. Cages, these sort of industrial cages, came over to Europe from the US after the Second World War, and they were brought over and adopted as a means of producing more food more cheaply, following the hardship of the Second World War. So they've only been around a few decades, really. They were introduced within the lifetime of many of our family members. But now, as with many things in the last few decades, it's gone too far. And intensive farming now facilitates an overproduction and an overconsumption of animal products. And there's a scientific consensus now, as I'm sure we're all aware, that this overproduction and consumption urgently needs to reduce. This graph shows us that 90% of the soy protein used in the EU is imported and fed to livestock. So, and the biggest consumers of soy are pigs and poultry. And in this way, intensive farming is driving deforestation and, of course, loss of biodiversity and climate change as a consequence. And high meat consumption, it's an inefficient way for us to get protein as humans. We lose around 60% of the protein from crops like soya when we feed it through livestock, which means that more land is needed to grow more of those crops to end up with a smaller amount of protein at the end. And of course, diets high in meat have higher greenhouse gas emissions associated with them because of the intensive nature of production. And that's why the Eat Lancet Commission, which was a commission last year of 37 world-leading scientists from across the globe, was drafted to look at what can we eat as humans, which is good for our health and that is sustainable for the planet with such a growing population. And they concluded that we need to eat more plant-based foods and less animal source foods. And so for all of these reasons, to do with the environment, with our own health and sustainability of feeding ourselves, there is a consensus that we have to eat less and better animal products. We cannot continue to farm the vast numbers of animals that we currently do in the EU. And as part of a holistic approach, it's possible to move entirely to farming systems that don't use cages and keep fewer animals and give them more space. So what are those alternative systems? Well, because cages are a very recent phenomenon in terms of farming history, we still have other systems that are in use. We still have the knowledge and the expertise on how to run them. And in some cases, actually, non-cage systems are increasing year on year. So, for example, with laying hens, the proportion of the EU's laying hens in non-cage systems has been increasing each year. And last year, it tipped over 50% for the first time. So now we have more than 50% of our laying hens out of cages. And they'll be in systems like barn systems and free range and organic systems, where they're able to to go outside, they're able to forage, dust bathe, and perch up high. And many member states have already banned the enriched cage, and they've already phased them out or in the process of doing so. And in addition to that, a whole host of rapid food business industry changes mean that the demand for cage-free eggs is higher than ever, and it's growing all the time. And for sows, there are the traditional free-range and organic systems, like in the top left-hand picture, where sows are outside with their piglets. And there's also a wide range of designed indoor systems. This is just a small selection of indoor free farrowing pens designed in Europe and in use in Europe commercially. And these keep them indoors, and they incorporate structures to protect the piglets from being crushed when the sow lies down. And research shows us that actually in free farrowing systems, there is lower total piglet mortality than in farrowing crates. And the reason for that is largely due to the less stressful and the healthier environment that the sows and the piglets are kept in. Unsurprisingly, when sows are free around their period of giving birth, they are less stressed. They have fewer stillborn piglets, and the sows eat better because she's less stressed, meaning that she produces more milk and the piglets are healthier and stronger, which is obviously good for production. And the sows themselves have less injuries because they're not confined in those crates, and they're not subjected to piglets causing them injuries. And that means they live longer as well, and they don't need replacing as often. So there are real production benefits. Here we have a designed indoor free farrowing pen with a contented sow. And she's not stressed, she's healthy, and she's got strong, happy piglets that are able to play. And this shows us group housing of pregnant sows. So instead of keeping them in those insemination stalls, many producers do keep sows in groups. And you can see at the front of the picture, there are feed stalls that the sows can go into to eat their food ration, and then they can back out of it. For rabbits, we also have non-cage indoor systems. So these are park systems. The picture on the left is an Austrian system, and the other two are French. And these park systems, they allow rabbits to lie stretched out, to hop, to stand up straight, to jump, and they have places to hide. Welfare is significantly improved over cages. We also have outdoor rabbit farming, free range and organic farming systems. This lady is an outdoor rabbit farmer in France, and this is a clip that she made with some quotes about her farming system. If you could play the video, Alex. Thank you. I think the quote that the rabbit farmer made at the end of that video really sums it up. It is indeed possible to give farm animals a life that's worth living, and such systems do exist. And because they exist, the suffering caused by the cage systems that we've seen is unnecessary. It's certainly not in accordance with established scientific knowledge and experience. We have to bear in mind that cages were introduced in a post-war era, and today the public expects better for our farm animals. And science shows us that we must move forward from these outdated systems. And now's the time to update legislation to reflect the abundance of scientific knowledge and make it possible for member states to move together to cage-free farming systems. And of course, this is timely because it's part of a much needed transition to a less and better approach to livestock farming to secure a healthier and sustainable food system for all of us, for today and for the future. Thank you very much.
Very much, Catherine, for this very inspiring and informative presentation. We now move to the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and we will have Elisa Colenda and David Baldock, who will be presenting the latest report from IEP on the transitioning to cage-free farming.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Olga. For those who don't know yet, IEP, we are a sustainability think tank based in Brussels and in London, conducting independent and evidence-based policy analysis and research. And as part of this project, we have been commissioned by CIWF to provide some thinking on how the transition towards cage-free farming could go hand in hand with the sustainability transition that is much needed in the livestock sector, and how the synergies between the two could be more pronounced in the debate. So we have looked at the laying hen sector, the pig sector, and the rabbit sector, which all use cages commonly still, but they differ in the circumstances with regard to consumer awareness and the legislative requirements, for example. So to conduct this research, we have conducted a literature review, but also consulted with several stakeholders from the whole value chain, from producers to retailers. And you will, when you have a look at the report, you will see these have also led to small case studies. One of them will be presenting right after this presentation as well, showing how a transition can take place and can benefit the environment, but also their business as such. And these interviews, they've helped us to collect recommendations, but also to give a sector overview on the housing systems that exist, most predominantly, how they perform on the environment and from a socioeconomic point of view. And this enabled us then to do a more forward-looking exercise and assess, depending on how this transition will take place, with which most ambitious steps we can also provide the best synergies for environment and socioeconomic performance, as well as SDGs. So I will give a short overview over the three sectors, and then my colleague David Baldock will continue with the wider societal benefits and the recommendations. So the laying hen sector, which Catherine already pointed to earlier, consists of 4 main housing systems at the moment. After the traditional cages have been banned in 2012, these main 4 systems remain in enriched caging systems, which exist around 50% of the time. The animal has around 600 centimeter of usable space, which is slightly bigger than an A4 sheet of paper. And then the existing alternative systems, they differ with regard to indoor-outdoor requirements, feed requirements, and space. There are some member states who have passed more ambitious legislation, such as Austria, Luxembourg have already banned cages. But in the main producing countries, such as Spain and France, for example, these steps haven't been taken yet. In the EU pig sector, as already mentioned, the sow stalls and farrowing crates are the most issue with regard to caging breeding sows, which are confined to a majority of their reproductive cycle. And several member states have progressed in this regard, but again, in the main producing countries, which are for pigs, Poland and France and Spain. There hasn't been such steps, and the EU legislation has not been changed since 2008. Lastly, for the rabbit sector, the most important point is that there is no legislation specifically addressing their welfare, even though they're the secondly most farmed species in Europe. And one of the feedback we also received from the farmers was that this leads to a non-existing level playing field and unfair competition. Many were struggling, and because this legislation is lacking, traditional cages are still very common. At the moment, according to DJ Sante, it's around 85% of the total EU production that is farmed still in traditional cages, and after that, then rich cages remain at around 9%, and Park and Pen organic exists, but there's still a small share. Here again, there are some countries who have passed more ambitious legislation, but the main producing countries such as Italy here and France remain at the EU minimum standards. So this was a recap on the three sectors, and David will talk you through how they perform from an environmental socio-economic perspective and present the recommendations as part of the report. So I will hand over the control. David, it should work now.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to talk for a minute about the environmental impact. I'm just trying to get the slide to work. So I am struggling to get, that's good. When animals are kept in highly intensive systems, as has been explained already, this greatly concentrates the environmental impact into a very small area. It creates additional impacts because of the emissions to air, to water, and it also intensifies impacts in the supply chains because the diets which are associated with very high intensity systems. In Europe, we have a heavy dependence on concentrated feeds for pigs and poultry in particular, as we've heard already. And a significant proportion of that concentrated feed consists of protein, and a significant proportion of that comes from imported proteins, including soya, from a number of countries with high risks of land use change and of deforestation. And we see in Europe that the proportion of pigs and poultry produced under organic systems, where there are very much built-in environmental controls to prevent the level of environmental impact because of the number of animals you're allowed to keep, because of the dietary requirements under organic systems. The sad truth is that the proportion of organic production in pigs and poultry is quite low. It's around 1%. And so we get a relatively small number of these intensive systems actually in a low environmental impact regime, which is properly overseen and properly labeled for consumers as well. The many different aspects of environmental footprint I've got here, some of them do vary. Obviously, healthy animals perform better environmentally. Highly concentrated systems can be more efficient in terms of the emissions of greenhouse gases per unit of production, but that's only one of a great number of different factors that have to be brought into play, including the skill of the management system, particularly around bedding and animal health. Then, sorry to go at such a pace, but we then looked at socio-economic impacts of a transition. And what we found was, again, there are a lot of different factors to bear in mind here. The potential for profitability, which is obviously a big concern for farmers, is such that at the moment, free-range systems, for example, for eggs, tend to be more profitable than enriched cages. So there's no inherent reason why profitability should decline with much higher welfare systems. And in fact, what one would hope for and expect to some degree is higher welfare systems to be associated with longer term higher acceptability for consumers, longer term higher prices, more satisfactory conditions for farm workers and farmers who are looking after the animals, who in intensive systems are exposed to a number of health concerns, including high dust levels in a lot of these systems. So the socioeconomic impacts, again, variable, complicated. We will see changes in price regimes, but there's a lot of scope for producing more meaningful jobs and potentially for having a sector which is higher value added, which is producing a better quality and healthier product, and potentially increasing employment on those successful farms quite considerably, because many aspects of higher welfare systems, no cage systems, do have greater labour requirements, and certainly high job satisfaction. So if we then look at how Europe could meet its higher level goals of contributing to sustainable development on a global scale, we think, well, how could a transition to cage-free approaches contribute to that right across the piece, not only in animal welfare, which is rather underrepresented in SDGs, unfortunately, but in terms of the very much established goals we have of no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, responsible consumption and production, life on the land, and so forth. We can see that the transition away from a cage-free system could contribute to that, particularly if we go beyond a simple change in housing systems to those which are better, but still essentially based on highly intensive large-scale production. And instead, if there was a shift in Europe to a lower volume of production, and we have quite a bit of data showing that emissions from livestock sector needs to be coming down down to at least 75% less than what it is at the moment by 2050. So that implies big adjustments in the whole farming system, and particularly in the livestock system. So we could couple together livestock changes which both deliver on welfare issues, but also walk us towards lower emissions, lower number of animals, reduced footprint in our supply countries in Latin America and elsewhere, less impact on land use change in the rest of the world, and accepting that some of those livestock products will be potentially higher value added. They could be more expensive, but they could be much more acceptable to consumers in the long term in more modest quantities. So that sort of set of changes seen together does contribute to a lot of those long-term goals that we've been talking about and the Commission has been highlighting in the Green New Deal. So how would we go in this direction? Well, we talked to quite a number of people. We looked at the literature, used some of our own experience. Some of us have worked on changes in the European Union for a long time. And I think the important message here is there's a lot of things that we could do. You can't just work on one front at once. It's important to change policy in a synchronized way in different fields at the same time. Perhaps the most obvious way of advancing in this area is to advance the legislation, a level playing field. It's already been mentioned, the lack of legislation at EU level for rabbit welfare, which is a huge omission, clearly. So that's the first thing to be addressed. But it's not only a matter of regulation, the way it's implemented is important. Farm animal welfare legislation has not been a star of implementation in Europe. There are quite a lot of cases. They've been highlighted by the Court of Auditors several times as being problematic. So oversight of implementation we've drawn attention to. Maybe it needs something like an observatory to make sure that the actual behavior on the ground corresponds to the regulatory standards. And then we need to support the regulation by changing the market so that the demand shifts in the same direction as the supply. And there's a number of ways of doing that. And just to highlight the value of having minimum green public procurement criteria, trying to make that can be supported by legislation as well. Then there's a major role for producers, processors, and retailers. They're the ones that are in direct contact with consumers in some cases. So they have a lot of scope for both taking on voluntary commitments themselves, as we've heard from quite a few processors, and also introducing standards throughout the retail sector, and supporting this with appropriate labels. Unlike some forms of production, it is quite easy to label quite clearly the welfare characteristics of a product. And then it's quite true that this requires investment at the farm level. Some of that will come about because of regulation, but there is also a good case for selective aid to help farmers to make that transition so that they can adjust. And there's also very much potential for support through the CAP, through help for organic farming, through delivery of more environmental public goods. And it's very difficult for intensive pig or poultry farm to produce anything much in the way of public goods, whereas you have a more extensive farming system. We have very long established ones in Spain and Portugal, for example, in the Dehesas and the Montados, free-range pigs, part of an environmental management system. So there's scope for supporting that, particularly in the new framework of the CAP and in the farm to fork strategy. And then we have to also think about how European producers and consumers are protected from imports, so we don't have European standards undermined by imports produced at a lower standard from outside the EU. So that does require trade adjustment, and it's interesting, there's been some discussion around this on the Mercosur agreement. That's not enough, but it's a start. So that's another important area of policy advance. And then finally, there's the question of labels, and there's a hierarchy here with European labels being necessary to get a certain level of consistency and reliability alongside private sector labels, which can be helped to innovate and to respond to local markets and more particular considerations. And underlying all this, we're suggesting that there's considerable need for investment in knowledge. That's not only research, but also transferring this in a practical way to the farm level, and having at an EU level an assessment of animal welfare on farms based on scientifically validated results-based evidence with consistent indicators. And this could be very much built into the review of welfare legislation the Commission has announced in the Farm to Fork strategy. So that strategy is a natural springboard for initiating thinking, evidence-based and new legislative and supplementary measures at the European level to move beyond cages. Thanks very much.
Thank you both. Thank you, David, and thank you, Elisa. And big thank you to the Institute for European Environmental Policy for this very informative report. We hope to continue the cooperation, and we hope that the EU institutions will pay note to this very important research that has been done by the IEP people. We now move on to revolutionary farming, and I'd like to present our next speaker, who is Ruth Zanders, and he is the director of the farm named Kipster in the Netherlands. And it is really, we are talking about a revolution in farming here.
Okay, Olga, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to tell about Kipster, what we are doing and why we are doing, and what are the results from cage-free farming. The first question, when we started about 7 years ago with engineering Kipster, our first question was, is it ethical to feed good food to animals? So for example, we have 1 kilogram of grain, you can feed, for example, 10 people with it, but we are giving that to a pig or a chicken, and then with an inefficient way, you can feed 2 to 4 people with it. And then we say we have a very efficient poultry and pig sector. But we were doubting if that's true. So our first question was not actually animal welfare, but is it ethical to do something with animals? Why should we do that? And for that, we went to Wageningen University, and there is a professor, Imke de Boer, and she did research of the role of animals in feeding the world. Why should we do something with animals? Now, and actually, it's quite very simple system. Use all the arable land we have in the world to produce plant-based products for people. Bring these crops and grains to a factory and have plant-based food for people. Then you have some marginal land in the world where nothing else is growing than grass. Then if you want to make food for people from that grass, then you can do that with a cow or a goat. And then you have some waste products from the land and some waste products from human consumption. And then a pig and a chicken can do something fantastic because they can eat that. And as thanks for that, you get some eggs and a little bit of meat. So you have some animal-based products for people. So that is actually the system, how it could work, or maybe how it should work in the world to feed the world. And then this is then the role of animals. But with saying this, that means also that we cannot have a look at what people want to eat, but what is possible to eat within the borders of the world. And then for sure, one thing is for sure, we have to eat less and less animal-based products. So, but yes, there is or there can be a role for animals in feeding the world. And this is what Kipster is doing. The basis is these role of animals, thus only feeding waste products to our birds. And with that, I think we are the only commercial laying farm in the world who is feeding the animals only with products which we as human beings cannot eat anymore or do not want to eat anymore. And then we say, okay, and the second thing is, if you have that role of animals, then we have to take maximum care for the animal welfare of these birds. And of course, there are a lot of other things we have to take care of. I'm not going to talk about that, but think about the climate, think about the boosters, think about public health, think about energy, think about the climate, and we have solutions for that also. So feel free to ask or to have a look at the Kipster. But now I'm going to tell about animal welfare, because if we as people are if we are so arrogant that we think that we can use animals for our food, then we have to take the best care which we can for the animals. So Frans de Waal, maybe you know him, he did a lot of research on feelings and emotions from animals, from monkeys, and he is always saying people and animals seems much more alike than we thought. And that's what we are saying at Kipster. Our chickens, they are living, intelligent beings with emotions and feelings, and we have to do the best to take care of that. And I can tell you, it's my experience that we want to keep our animals in an animal-friendly way as good as we can, but to keep animals in an animal-friendly way, in a commercial way of life, it's very difficult, and maybe it's impossible, but we have to do our best. Now, what's Kipster? We re-engineered from scratch how can we make a system which is also good for the animals? We did that together with Wageningen University and with the Dutch Animal Protection. And then you see in the blue one, that's our courtyard garden, our indoor garden. The brown ones there, that is our night quarter. There is the feed, the water. There they can sleep and then they can lay an egg. Then the green ones is our outdoor garden, so that they can go outside. The gray areas, there are technical space for catching fine dust and for the manure and for packing the eggs. And the yellow one is for visitors. So we want to be very open to everybody, so everybody can come and have a look what we are doing at Kipster from 10 in the morning till sunset in the evening. You don't have to call, you can come and have a look what we are doing. Now, this is our building from the first Kipster in the Netherlands. Now we have 3, but this is the first one in Venray, so a special building. But you can see a lot of daylight inside. The birds can go outside. This is from outside, and this is our inside garden. Because what we are always doing when we say we want to have more animal welfare, then we make some holes in the wall and then we say go outside. But a lot of birds, they are not going outside because I think they are a little bit afraid for frogs or for predators, or maybe they don't feel well or something like that, because they recognize only 100 other birds. So maybe they are a little bit afraid, so they are not going outside. So we said, okay, then if we know that, then maybe it's better to do something good inside. And that's our indoor garden. Birds, they like to live in, they hate rain. So what we made is a room there fully daylight can come in, and also when it's raining, they can go there. And then what we have forgotten, I think the last 30, 40, 50 years, is that actually birds are forest animals. Normally they live in the forest, and that's what we want to do in our indoor garden. We are trying to make a little bit of a forest from it. So that's what you see with the trees. And of course you can say to me, Ruud, that's not a forest. Yes, I know, but we are only trying to make a sort of a forest. And nobody knows how we can do that, so we are trying. It's trial and error. That's the indoor garden, and then we have an outdoor garden, because to go outside, it's good for, I think, almost all animals. So not only for birds, but also for people. We are also animals. We also want to go outside. So I think for almost all animals, it's good to that they can go outside. But the question was, how much space must there be outside? So we didn't know. So we asked the Dutch Animal Protection. They said, yeah, actually, we also don't know. So together we asked Wageningen University, and they did research how birds are going outside. And then are they going all together, or and how much time per day? And then at the end of that research, they said if you make on both sides 5 meters free range, then that's actually enough if you combine it with your indoor garden. So 5 meters, we thought that's not very much. So we made on both sides 10 meters, and we are now 3 years open with our first farm, and it seems that that's enough, so that they feel very well. If I look to the results from our system, and then I look only to the results from the animal welfare, then together with the Dutch Animal Protection and the Wageningen University, we can conclude that the system works. We don't debeak the birds because we don't want to do that. And the technical results, they are equal to the standards of the decal white, and the decal white is the breed we have. And we did a welfare quality research together with Wageningen University, so then they look to the birds and to the feathers and all these kind of things, to the legs. And we had very good results, equal or maybe a little bit better than organic. So we were very happy with that. We have now our third flock. The first flock we did very well. The second flock we were not so happy with that, and the third flock we think it's going well. And one of the biggest challenges was the feather of the animals, the plumage. And we think that was due to the feed. So not to the system, but to the feed. So because it's very new what we are doing with our feed. Nobody in the world is doing that, so we are also sometimes trying, is this feed good enough for the animals? And I think in the second flock we made some mistakes with it, so we have learned a lot from it, and I hope that we do not make these mistakes anymore. If you want, Compassion in World Farming did a case study for Kipster. This is on their website, so if you want, you can have a look at it. And feel free, if you have more questions or something like that, send me an email or call me, or you are always welcome to visit us. But for me, I think that we prove that it's possible also in a commercial way to do it better for animal welfare than we did in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruud. We've been to your farm a number of times, and it is indeed exceptional. We now move to our next speaker, Sean Wensley from the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe. And Sean is the chair of the Working Group on Animal Welfare in FVE, and he will also talk about FVE's position on ethical and sustainable agriculture.
Thank you, Olga. It's a pleasure to be taking part in this important webinar. Thank you for the invitation. I do so, as you mentioned, as a representative of FVE, the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, which is the representative body for the veterinary profession in Europe. And we are comprised of members from 49 national veterinary associations from 39 European countries. And specifically, as you also mentioned, I am today speaking as chair of FVE's Animal Welfare Working Group, which is a standing committee, a dedicated group within FVE, which has been in existence since 2014. I've been the chair for the last 12 months, and I hope I can persuade you that we are working towards a proactive, progressive agenda on animal welfare, of which clearly this topic of cage-free farming and the need to consider cage-free approaches within the concept of sustainable animal agriculture for the future is very much in keeping with our thinking and aspirations. We lead policy positions within FVE. I've given some examples there just of some of the farm animal positions that we've published in the last few years. They include policy position papers on preventing tail docking and tail biting in pigs, welfare of dairy cows, focusing on lameness and unwanted surplus animals in farm animal production. Those policy positions, while we lead the development of them, then go out to broad consultation across all of our member associations and are given full consideration at our General Assembly. So when they are finally published and are available to anyone with an interest in any of these areas, then you can be assured that they have come from a broad breadth, both of geography and the very many members of the veterinary profession, from practitioner backgrounds, species specialist backgrounds, academic backgrounds and policy backgrounds. I think they're good documents, they're thoroughly referenced, and they're all available at the FVE website, which I've included there. So on this topic specifically, we certainly have been coming to it from the perspective of sustainable animal agriculture. And I think that was first formalized in our policy position of 2016 when we considered veterinarians' contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in that paper, we argued that animal welfare must be part of the sustainability agenda, as several speakers have reiterated this morning. And within that, we specifically published that our view that animals should be kept in environments with which they can cope, be free from unnecessary suffering, and be able to express important behaviours and not suffer from frustration and boredom. And as was said earlier, these important behaviours specifically are highly internally motivated behaviours, which have evolved in the species that we now keep as domestic animals, and the frustration and prevention of which can be sources of suffering in their own right. More recently, just earlier this year, we've again reiterated our commitment to the importance of promoting animal welfare and sustainable development. And in this particular position paper, we did so in association with the American Veterinary Medical Association and the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association. So this particular paper represents the consensus veterinary view from Europe, North America, and Canada. Again, we say that we recognize that sentient animals are capable of experiencing positive physical and emotional states or feelings, including but not limited to comfort and pleasure, as well as negative states such as pain, fear, and frustration. Accordingly, animals deserve appropriate care, consideration, and respect. That is, animals should experience both a good life and a humane death. And I'd like to pick out just two parts of that statement, that paragraph within the overall statement. One is that we refer to respect, and we go on to clarify that this means we recognize sentient animals have an intrinsic value. They're not only valuable for the benefits that they bring to humans. And we also reflect in this very recent paper the shift to ensuring animals are provided with a good life. So that is not only sparing them the worst of some of the things that can happen when they're kept for human benefit, but that our aspiration should be that they have a good quality of life in return for the benefits that we derive from them. And these words would give a flavour of what we mean by a good life. Husbandry systems should offer opportunities for positive welfare, such as contentment, play, and comfort. So this is captured clearly from very many veterinarians across the world as the aspiration for animal welfare. And David Baldock there in the IEEP presentation, which I enjoyed, thank you, said that animal welfare currently isn't explicitly captured in the Sustainable Development Goals, even though we can clearly, as he did, demonstrate ways that they can help meet, that animal welfare can help meet the goals. But we think about the 3 E's of sustainability, or we certainly can do, those being the environmental pillar, the economic pillar, and an ethical pillar. And just to say that it is our view that animal agriculture will only continue to be sustainable if it is ethically sustainable and it accords with the values of citizens who are then willing to continue supporting the systems and products that are derived from it. This has been picked up, as we know, in recent comments and publications and commitments from the European institutions. Council of Europe just last year saying that good animal welfare is an integral part of sustainable animal production. And Commissioner Kyriakides saying that animal welfare is an essential element of the strategy, the farm to fork strategy. It's a vision that can lead us to sustainable livestock production and to a much needed change of our current farming system. And we would agree with that. So to conclude with an update on current FVE activity in this area specifically, we are taking opportunities like this one to advocate our existing vision that animal welfare is integral to sustainable animal agriculture and the future of animal farming, that should incorporate the opportunity to perform important internally motivated behaviours, as well as going beyond that to afford animals a good life and give them other behavioural opportunities that they enjoy. And we're currently in the process, this is a live topic for us, we're currently in the process of developing 2 new specific policy positions on moving towards sustainable husbandry systems for laying hens and farrowing sows specifically. So whilst they're not yet published, and they will be soon in the course of our policy making programme, they're just being finalised at the moment, and then they will go out for the consultation with members that I mentioned. But I can tell you that these are some of the principles that will be captured in them. That sows and laying hens should have a good life, that they should have behavioural opportunity, and that should be alongside good physical health outcomes. Of course, we're not only concerned with their psychological well-being, critical though that is, it's essential that they also continue to have good physical health outcomes. We work to support animal agriculture. Veterinary practitioners in particular work, as you know, to support farmers and producers. And part of that is making sure that there are acceptable but not excessive transition times. So we find that there is greatest sympathy and buy-in to these sorts of visionary and aspirational positions when that is at least recognized, and I'm sure that's shared by many here as well. But importantly, they shouldn't be excessive, so that's not an excuse to delay. And finally, whilst it's not the veterinary profession's job or remit to consider how these transitions are funded, clearly we rely on economists and others to help with that. Nevertheless, we will make comments that it needs to be considered, whether that's from the marketplace through increased knowledge and labeling, whether it's through some of the public funding mechanisms that the IEEP have mentioned today. And perhaps underpinning all of that, we do feel we have an important role as the veterinary profession to help ensure that citizens properly value animal-derived food. And that it isn't just a commodity. They understand that there are sentient animals behind the animal-derived products that that many people consume. So in conclusion, FEE is against extreme confinement, and we recognise that currently some housing systems exist which do not meet the animals' needs, as have been demonstrated earlier. We need to move towards more sustainable agriculture, and we are absolutely committed to helping make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. We are eagerly awaiting for the policy positions of FEE. We now move to Andrea Gavinelli, who will give us the position of the European Commission. Andrea is the head of the Animal Welfare Unit of DG Sante. Please, Andrea.
Hello. Thank you for giving us the possibility to be intervening today. It's very interesting. I was following from the beginning, and it's clear-cut fitting perfectly this event with the moment we are through, including in the Commission in terms of animal welfare and the interface with the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork. In fact, the next slide. 1 second, that I have to share my camera. That's it. And I should be able to move the slide myself, probably. And now, coming to what I was saying, and not to waste my 10 minutes. First of all, I was saying that the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork, as you can see in the next slide, are in fact elements very important because they are highlighting a central role for animal welfare with a sentence and a statement that is having an important meaning for the policy making of DG Sante, DG Agri, and a bunch of DGs that are connected. The connection is between the food quality, the need to reduce the use of medications, and of course, important, the impact on biodiversity, so the environment. This is a total new concept in terms of looking into welfare for the policy making. That's why we are at the edge of a very dense period for us. In fact, why? In the next slide, you see what's going to happen. We have started a process that will introduce a revision, the possibility to revise the full acquis of the animal welfare legislation. Next slide, please. Here we are. And in fact, we have the mandate and the scope to align this legislation. You highlighted some elements before with the new scientific evidence that in fact EFSA has been consulted to look into the possibility to broaden the scope of the legislation to have a possibility to enforce it better and easily, and of course to improve the quality of the welfare. it's clear that this demand has been growing up in the last years and has been demonstrated that there are benefits in adopting this approach versus the other elements that I mentioned before, from food safety to, in fact, the environment. As we saw in the previous presentation, and as it is also mentioned in the Farm to Fork, animal welfare is also something to be better transmitted through the food chain, and the options for a possible animal welfare labeling are to be considered. In fact, soon a study, at least to take a picture of what's going on that will be starting. We start. The next slide, please. So, as I said, this initiative of the citizen initiatives of the End the Cage Age is coming timely because, in fact, what is touching upon, and this is, I don't have to spend time on this, is in fact something that will be taken up in the fitness check work. The next slide is illustrating more practically the parcours, the way, the next steps we will have, procedurally speaking, on this. It has been submitted officially and formally on the 2nd of October. And in fact, in 1 month, less now, we will have a meeting between the organizer and the Commission with the relevant services of the Commission. The European Parliament, I know, plans a public hearing, and the Commission will have to reply to the organizer at the end of the process with the legal and political conclusions and, of course, the action that it intends to take. This is a time frame of 6 months that will be extremely important, dense, and where, in fact, the considerations to be done and the reflections are to be jointly, in my opinion, shared in an open dialogue, because this is quite a critical moment and a big opportunity, a big responsibility too. Next slide, please. The initiatives, in fact, that are connected with these 6 months of reflection and, of course, already planned are, in particular, in my opinion, the requests that we made to EFSA to prepare scientific opinions on the main species that are in the legislation today. Some of them, in fact, like the laying hens and the pigs, directly invested by this initiative. The pilot project on the best practices for alternative egg production system that is going to start very soon, and where the terms of reference, in fact, includes the first large study on alternative to cages. This is a big news. And, of course, the fitness check that I mentioned before of the full acquis, something never happened in the last 20 years. So not a small thing. The next slide, please. In fact, why we are doing a fitness check? In fact, we are doing this because it's very important to check the capacity to fit with the new legislation with the evolution of science. We saw that when we saw the Kipster example, we have innovations and technologies that evolved in the last years enormously from a directive that was adopted in 1999. A lack of sufficient legal protection of certain species is also there, because 9858 is clearly a transversal directive with generic requirements, but we have no capacity to intervene on it as it is today at the Commission level. What further action might be necessary? This is the big question, but clearly we need to to align this with the sustainability goals, and this is a huge challenge for all of us. Just to sum up, in the next slide, you see, change please, thank you. In fact, you see the list of the legislation that is the subject of the fitness check. As you can see, in fact, and there is a sort of provocation, there is a photo of some fish. Why? Because, for example, it's true, even that animals that are growing up in terms of number and protein production merit some consideration. Clearly, they are for the moment covered in certain requirements, but very limited, in very limited manner. But they are they are the main absent in a certain sense, but there are many other species, of course, we know, that are not covering this. But this exercise, in any case, concentrate on the current acquis. That's the rule. So let's see what will evolve from it. In the next slide, you have, in fact, what is ahead of us. To see in parallel with these 6 months also that are the reactivity needed to the ACI submission. First, there is an external study that includes targeted interviews with stakeholders and, of course, a public consultation. Then there is in particular the connection between the pilot projects, the scientific evidence, and of course the audits. So all the elements that are already present. Last but not least, we will conclude an evaluation of the EU animal welfare strategy very soon. And this will subject of a Commission staff working document, where we will analyze all these outcomes, and all this will feed the process of the fitness check. And concluding with, in fact, the revision of the EU acquis. Last slide, in fact, that is the last one, is just to recap that what we are doing on welfare, as I started this presentation, this initiative will be synergic with all the overarching one in the Farm to Fork. So just a reminder, we have the commitment there to study a legislative framework for sustainable food system with a deadline of 2023, where there is also clearly the necessity to work on governance and collective involvement of all the stakeholders. These are all the principles that will be embedded and hopefully will reinforce all the process. So to conclude, for me, what is essential is that we have started an incredible process of reconsideration of the animal welfare acquis that, in my opinion, because of the synergy with all these policies that we have today, from biodiversity to, in fact, what is a capacity to respect the need to feed the world, all together will only give more strength to animal welfare and hopefully, and this is the end point, better welfare to the animals. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this, for the presentation and the overview of the Commission actions, current and future ones. We are looking to you now for the Commission and eagerly awaiting for the Commission decision on the cage age ECI. I know we are running over time now, but we just have a few more minutes to close this webinar. We will go now to MEPs, and we start with MEP Martin Hojsik from Slovakia, and who is a member of the political group Renew Europe.
Thank you very much, Olga, and it's really a pleasure to be here. For me, it's really staggering that we live in Europe in 21st century, and yet we still keep animals in cages. It's something which, you know, I'm really expecting that to see concrete proposals from the Commission for banning the cage keeping. But I want to briefly talk, and I'm looking forward to them, but I want to talk about something which is up on our hands already next week, and that's the common agriculture policy. Because one thing is the systems where we are limiting or banning the use of, well, actually, let's be honest, we should ban it. Let's not play with limiting. Ban the use of cages in agriculture for animal keeping. And the other thing is, if we are still permitting the use of public money, your money, my money, to provide subsidies for such animal keeping methods, to provide subsidies for farms, or in large scale, I tend to call them meat factories, where the animals are kept in similar conditions. Sorry. And I think this is what needs to change as well. And this is where I believe that next week, when we are voting on a CAB, I hope that we will see at least something moving on the maximum stocking density, on how much there is actually limit to stocking of the animals, because let's be honest, cage is allowed to stock animals more together, just like antibiotics, and really see the push for extensive, rather intensive farming of animals, which, yes, ultimately means fewer animals, but I think that's really part of the solution. Fewer animals in better living conditions. And I strongly believe that Europe not only can, but should lead by example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. We now move to Sylvia, MEP Sylvia Sporek from Poland. She's a member of the Green Group in the European Parliament. And over to you, Sylvia. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, good morning. Over 1,300,000 people believe in a cage-free future. I'm one of them, and I have fought for animal rights as I see animals for who they really are, living beings, not products. I would like to thank Compassion in World Farming for their efforts in creating cage-free future for all animals farmed in the EU. Now, the EU must revise animal welfare legislation. It's high time we ruled out caged farming and factory farming as a whole, not only because of its detrimental effects of the environment and rural communities, but also for ethical reasons. Farming animals in such ways is simply not justifiable and does not belong in the 21st century. The from farm to fork strategy is certainly not enough to establish a sustainable and environmentally friendly agricultural model, and we must ensure that the European Commission presents European citizens with meaningful commitments. But as long as animals are perceived as products, as long as we discuss animal welfare, the rights will be compromised. We should not be discussing whether or not to keep animals in cages or what is the acceptable level of animal welfare standards. Rather than running in circles, trying to preserve the status quo, we should be working towards a future where respecting animals is the standard. A future where the speciesism is a long forgotten nightmare. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. We now move to MEP Manuela Ripa from Germany, who is also a member of the Green Group.
Dear all, congratulations also from my side to the ECI organizers and the KJH. It is a big success and brings the topic of cruel animal suffering directly to the eyes of the European Commission and to the public. And my appeal to the European Commission is, use the momentum, use the voice of more than 1 million European citizens in order to bring more animal welfare to the EU. At the moment, we are in a transition phase. We know that there is a massive loss of biodiversity. Around 1 million animal, plant, and species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades, more than ever before in human history, and that we need to tackle climate change. We all know, but unfortunately, a lot of decision makers tend to ignore that this is paramount that the whole EU starts to have better environmental and animal welfare laws, and that we need to change the current common agricultural policy. We cannot afford to have the next 7 years such a detrimental farming policy. The IEEP report presented today shows that we do not need caging animals and that a cage-free farming is possible to the benefit of all of us. I am thrilled to see that so many people and NGOs across Europe managed to put together a comprehensive project to ban cages in farming, with concrete proposals to replace them with viable alternative systems. Even better, they did so via the ECI democratic tool. Direct democracy is entrenched in the political culture of my party, the Ecologic Democratic Party, where several citizen claims brought some positive political breakthroughs. Amongst others, my party, the ÖDP, initiated one of the most successful petitions in German history. We forced Bavaria to change its legislation on farming policies. We now have one of the most modern laws in nature protection, as more than 1.7 million people went in just 2 weeks to the municipalities to sign the petition. And I'm deeply convinced that when the traditional institutional system fails to deliver citizens' legitimate expectations, people's direct initiatives will be the way forward to improve the quality of our democracy. This is the reason why I support the ECI mechanism within our European Union. But we need to make the mechanism stronger. It is regrettable that there is no binding effect of any ECI. There should be the obligation to real political action once the threshold is met, like the Bavarian example I just mentioned. The planned interinstitutional conference on the future of Europe should bring forward a renewed approach to this important instrument of direct democracy. Now that the End the Cage Aid petitioners delivered all those signatures from very concerned animal friends out there, the ball is in the pitch of the European Commission. In Europe, we have on paper the highest animal welfare standards in the world. Yet, we have a very big problem of general indifference amongst governments vis-à-vis existing animal-related legislation. Even worse, the Commission usually ignores this repetitive and systematic violation of existing animal laws and does not enough to foster a better enforcement. But it is high time to act. The commitment of the European Commission with the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy offers a good basis to come up with a proper long-term solutions to put an end to archaic industrial farm systems under which hundreds of millions of animals suffer on a daily basis and whose negative impact on the environment and on climate places the whole planet in risk. I repeat myself, European Commission, use the momentum. Use the voice of more than 1 million European citizens in order to bring more animal welfare to the EU. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Manuela. And we now move to our last MEP, Michaela Šojdrová from Czechia, who is a member of the European People's Party.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am happy to meet you, and I'm happy for this opportunity to speak at this conference and express my view on the transitioning to cage-free farming, especially of hens, which I consider to be one of the fundamental topics of farming in the upcoming years. I agree with previous colleagues, speakers. I think that there are unacceptable conditions of animals in the agriculture, we have to refuse it. Good news is that in some countries we are starting to change the conditions, as some of them mentioned. On 16th of September, the lower chamber of Parliament of the Czech Republic voted to ban cage farming of hens from 2027. Thanks to this outcome, companies and farmers have 7 years to adapt to this new legislation, and their financial profit should not be in danger. Me and my political party, Christian Democrats, support this legislative initiative and are in favor of cage-free farming of hens. We strongly believe that we should treat all the creatures with respect. But we didn't win yet, because we need support of Senate and of President to sign this law. So I am very afraid that now we have to be active on European level, because many of members of Czech Parliament expressed their opinion that this ban should be introduced on the European level. Now we have this motivation for all member states to support this motion. I believe that 2027 is the last possible year when the cage farming of hens should be banned, and that companies and farms all over Europe would have enough time to adapt. But what I saw and heard today, Mr. Cavinelli presented legislative framework, and I am a little bit afraid that the work is not so developed, because I think if we want to ban cage of hens in 2027, we have to start today, not in 2023. So I hope that we have maybe to be faster. So I call to work faster in this way, and I hope in very good cooperation together in Parliament with Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all speakers today, the MEPs, FVE, Sean Wensley, Ruud Zanders from Kipster, Catherine Jadav, of course, our IEP colleagues, Elisa and David, and of course, Andrea Gavinelli from the European Commission for joining us today and speaking at this webinar. For us, the cage is a symbol of our broken food system, but it is also an instrument that keeps a farming system alive, and a farming system that is greatly outdated and has caused suffering to billions of animals all over the world. So let's end the cage age as soon as possible. Before I close the session, I would like to let you know that we have put together a number of briefings on the different species of animals kept in cages, and these briefings are available on the webinar website for those who would like to take a closer look and be informed about the conditions that animals are raised in. So they are the species mentioned are sows and hens and quail and rabbits, calves, and ducks and geese. I hope you find them interesting. For last but not least, I'd like to mention that you can watch a recording of this webinar, and a link will be sent to you in 24 to 48 hours. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a nice day today. Bye.